Hello friends, good evening. This is your friend Bhushan. I welcome you all to the another edition of Daily News Analysis. In this particular edition, we are going to discuss some very important articles that were featured in the Hindu and Indian Express newspapers. So, starting with particularly the explain section, we are going to discuss few important articles from the perspective mainly of prelims, although you can find its relevance in mains as well. So, the first important article in this section is the recent news, the recent estimates actually released by the government, particularly the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation about GDP growth. So, Q4 GDP growth at 6.5% decline, but we are optimistic for the future of our economic growth. Along with it, another important news is about fiscal deficit, target being achieved, target being met for this year. So, these two news are very important from the perspective of GS3 economy as well as from the perspective of prelims. Knowing some basic terms is very vital. Another important article that we are going to discuss is about enrollment decline in government schools. Very important from the perspective of GS2 and education. See, the government is investing heavily in the promotion of education, particularly through the government schools. So, the enrollment decline is a worrying sign. So, we are going to discuss some important reasons behind this decline and what government can do better. Particularly, the third important article that we are going to discuss is about IndiaAI Mission. This particular news was featured in the Indian Express newspapers. So, we are going to discuss the background of the mission along with some targets which are being set now. Another important and very interesting article is about why men are taller than women. So, you must have observed many times men are taller than women. So, the scientists have found the reason behind this particular discrepancy in the genes. So, we are going to discuss what exactly is the study, and along with it, from the perspective of prelims, important is to know what are some genetic diseases that we must know about. So, particularly in the decoded section, which is important for mains, we are going to discuss very interesting and very important article that was featured in the editorial page of Indian Express. It is about the Rankings Mirage. So, what exactly the editorial particularly here argues, despite India being ranked 4th largest economy, we need to be cautious while celebrating this fact. So, essentially, the particular analysis, the comparative aspects with other countries, per capita and other factors of the economic growth are, we are going to discuss those particular aspects in that particular article, along with some facets of inclusive growth and how India can go about achieving the inclusive growth going forward instead of just relying on the rankings. That's what the crux of that particular article. So, we are going to briefly discuss that particular editorial as well, that is important from the perspective of economy GS3. So, let's dive into it. So, the first important article that we are going to discuss is about GDP growth forecast. See, both these news are important from the perspective of particularly prelims mostly, but those who are giving mains this time, knowing what exactly are the recent trends is very vital. So, you have to mention some data, some you have to draw some maps, graphs as well to support your arguments many times. So, essentially from the perspective of mains also, these two articles are very vital. So, essentially the first article is about GDP growth at 6.5% in 24-25, slowest since pandemic. Okay, obviously this is this particular news is featured in the Hindu. Particularly the Hindu always takes critical stance, okay, about this news. Although it has slowed down to 66.5%, but it is still a substantial growth. That's why even even chief economic advisor says that in a growth scarce environment, India is holding up its growth numbers better than others. So, it is still an optimistic number, but obviously the Hindu actually takes a negative tone here. So, we have to be optimistic about our own growth. Okay. So, be optimistic, you are going to be a civil servant. Okay. So, another important along with this article, another important article we are going to pair and discuss is about government meeting its fiscal deficit target of 4.8% in for fiscal year 25. See, particularly this article is important. In recent prelims, you must have seen the numericals which are asked on fiscal deficit, primary deficit. So we are going to see how you could have tackled those sort of questions. So be prepared for the numericals as well now, because that is something, you can observe some new trends from the PYQs, particularly the recent the paper that happened. So particularly when the first article that we are going to discuss, the data related to that article, GDP data is released by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So this particular highlight here is very, very important. Who releases quarterly GDP related data? It is released by Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So what is the nature of data? These two interrelated data sets, that is Q4 GDP estimates and provisional full year fiscal year 25 GDP estimates, both are given. So essentially, why this data is provisional? See, mostly the GDP related data, there are revisions going forward as well. So many times the provisional estimates are released much earlier, but in subsequent years that data can be changed. That data can change. That's why the current estimates, the current data is termed as a provisional data. So the current GDP growth for fiscal year 25 stands at 6.5%. It is slowest since 2020-21. Okay, so it is slowest. So to certain extent, considering the uncertain environment that Indian economy in particular finds itself in, with Trump's tariff war and other uncertainties domestically, with external pressure, still this achieving this 6.5% target for a major economy like India is also a huge achievement. On the other hand, there is household consumption related news as well. It grew to 7.2% in fiscal year 25, up from 5.6% in FY24. So there is some good news when it comes to household consumption. It grew to 7.2%. So essentially, there is deceleration in growth, but no need to be alarmed, as said by our CEA, that is Chief Economic Advisor. Essentially, in the growth scarce era that we are currently in, this particular number is still good. Okay, so as I said, this is the remark by Chief Economic Advisor here. So he is spinning that particular data in a more optimistic, more positive note here. So what about the sector-wise performance? So see, understanding this particular chart, you do not have to remember particular data or data point here. You just have to know the trends. So know the trend, how agriculture is performing, how manufacturing is performing over the years, over in this quarterly period is also very, very important. So you can see agriculture, livestock and forestry is performing better. So essentially fiscal year 25 Q4 growth is at 5.4%. Overall fiscal year 25 growth is at 4.6%, while fiscal year 24 growth was 2.7%. So definitely we are seeing the brighter sides for the agriculture sector particularly. So that's why we can see in FY25 the growth increased when it comes to agriculture sector. What about manufacturing? Manufacturing is also, you can see the manufacturing is also it is declined to certain extent at 4.5%. To certain extent it has been stabilized. Our manufacturing sector particularly has been stabilized, or rather the right word is stagnant. So essentially we have to increase the base of the manufacturing sector essentially. So that's why we are focusing on MSME, small business expansion. We are focusing on giving credits to corporations at affordable rates. All those things government is doing, but at the same time manufacturing base itself is low, because we have essentially jumped from agriculture directly to services. So we have skipped that middle part post our 1991 economic reform. So that's what we are seeing in this data particularly as well. What about construction? Construction is going with robust pace, as you can see, with government investing heavily with government investing heavily in these sectors, particularly with infrastructure coming up, very, very important area for government investment. The construction sector is seeing the huge growth, particularly the services. Again, it is constantly sort of 7 to 9% category when it comes to growth. So this growth trends are important. Just go through it briefly. That is very, very vital. Measurement of national income, GDP, it is a sum of expenditure of household, business and the government. Okay. What exactly GDP actually summarizes? It summarizes it sums up expenditure by household, businesses and the government. What GVA does, gross value added, from the supply side does is measures value added by each sector, excludes taxes and subsidies. So essentially GDP is from the demand side, GVA is from supply side. So you must be knowing the formula. This is some basics of GDP GVA here. Essentially GDP is GVA plus taxes minus subsidies. So to get the GDP from GVA, you can get GDP from the number that is GVA. Just add taxes and subtract subsidies. So essentially you will get the GDP. So data is released in both nominal and real. What exactly is nominal? Nominal, whenever the term nominal comes in economics, that means it is at a current price. Whenever you have the real term, it is at inflation adjusted terms. So you must have seen, nominal GDP, real GDP. There is a difference. So essentially nominal, current, real, inflation adjusted. That is what you have to remember here. So nature of estimate, the current figures are provisional estimates. So as I said earlier, these are provisional estimates. They will be revised over 2 years. So first revised estimates will be there by 26. First estimates, overall estimates will be there by 27 as well. So we will see the revised data by 27 as well. So the more sort of more accurate data, I will say. The key takeaways from the report that was released by MOSPI is India's real GDP growth is moderating post-COVID. This is very, very vital news here. Very, very vital data point. See, the growth boom that India actually faced or experienced post-COVID is now moderating due to heavy external pressure. And also there are some internal issues as well. Agriculture outperformed manufacturing in growth since 2019. This trend is also very important. As I said, knowing the trends is the foremost thing here. Agriculture outperformed manufacturing in growth since 2019. Very important, just remember that fact. Manufacturing sector's weakness is a major concern despite policy focus. As I said earlier, we are focusing on manufacturing. We have Make in India, made for the world and whatnot. But still, there is a manufacturing sector is facing some issues, particularly weaknesses are there on from the policy front. There are policies, but we have to look at the implementation part as well. There is a real GVA growth offers a clear picture of sectoral health and economic momentum. So as I said, real GVA growth particularly gives us more accurate picture here or more holistic picture. When it comes to the second article, it is titled essentially Government meets fiscal deficit target of 4.8% for fiscal year 25. So you must have seen, mostly these fiscal deficit targets are getting changed year after year. So we have FRBM Act of 2003. Under that particular act, there was a promise of fiscal deficit, getting reduced to 2.5% of GDP. But that target was never achieved to a certain extent. So consistently, obviously, and there are revisions subsequent as well. So what exactly does that particular law allows such revisions? That is the question we have to ponder over. It does allow. So that's why government often actually postpones achieving that 2.5% fiscal deficit target. Mostly what happens when there is a contractionary pressure, government tends to actually focus more on monetary expansion or fiscally expansionary measures, so that they can boost the growth through these fiscal measures. So essentially, so that the growth can be there from the fiscal side, because sometimes to control the inflation, the monetary side by RBI actually contracts. So essentially, government has to to actually reinvigorate the animal spirit in the economy, has to spend. So in a way that affects fiscal deficit. So that's what happened post COVID, when there was a growth slump. So many times this fiscal deficit target becomes a casualty in that particular scenario. So essentially, what the current data says, the key fiscal data and trends for the government of India for FY 24-25 based on Controller General of Accounts. Now this data is released by Controller General of Accounts, that you remember. The current fiscal deficit, that is fiscal deficit expenditure minus revenue, is at 15.77 lakh crore. See, these data points you do not have to remember. As I said earlier, having the basic conceptual clarity, what exactly fiscal deficit indicates, what are some trends. Trends is the way to go, and some important data points that you have to remember. As percentage of the GDP, we have achieved the target for FY 24-25 particularly, that is, we have set the target of 4.8%, we have achieved it. Fiscal year 26 fiscal deficit target is around 4.4% of GDP as per budget 24-25. So for FY 26 we have this target now of 4.4% of GDP, achieving fiscal deficit of 4.4% of GDP. So essentially, government receipts, total receipts, tax, non-tax plus capital, these are total receipts are 30.78 lakh crore, 97.58% of revised estimates. So essentially, there is always this gap, okay, revised and estimates. Essentially, revised estimates and the total receipts in that regard, there are certain changes oftentimes. The shortfall, as I said, there is a shortfall because 97.8% of the revised estimates is the government receipts now. So where is this 2 to 3% shortfall going or coming from? So miscellaneous capital receipts are there of the value 17,202 crore, only 52.1% of the target, includes disinvestment proceeds and disinvestment earnings as well. So, there is a shortfall in that regard. Government meets fiscal deficit target, but despite that, government met the fiscal deficit target. So government expenditure, it is total expenditure is of 46.55 lakh crore. Now also 97.8% of revised estimates. It is a 97. So you can see again there is a gap. So now let's see some total revenue tax revenue breakdown here. So corporate tax collected 9.87 lakh crore. Income tax, so the most important observation point here is income tax is more than corporate tax. So this particular fact is very, very vital particularly. But income tax, you can see there is a minus 6% shortfall. So essentially the income tax is the collection of income tax declined particularly, but corporate tax increased. It is 0.7% higher than earlier estimates. So what are the key takeaways? Key takeaways: fiscal deficit target we achieved 4.8%, which we set in our earlier target. Disinvestment target significantly missed, pulling down overall capital receipt. As I said, there is a shortfall in government receipts that was shown in the revised estimates. Okay, so essentially we missed the disinvestment target. Income tax collections underperformed while corporate tax slightly exceeded expectation. As I said, as I observed here as well, income tax actually declined, although it is still more than corporate tax. Okay, both revenue and expenditure remain closely aligned with revised estimates at 97.8%. So essentially, the revised estimates are close to 97.8%, nearer sort of. So let's see some important terms. So in recent prelims you must have seen the numericals on fiscal deficit. So let's see how you could have solved that particular numerical. So fiscal deficit, what exactly is the definition of fiscal deficit? It occurs when total government expenditure exceeds total revenue receipts excluding borrowings. So essentially you can see the formula of fiscal deficit here: total expenditure minus total revenue receipt plus recovery of loans plus other receipts. Okay, so it indicates total borrowing requirement of the government. Okay, so essentially this fact is important here. What fiscal deficit indicates is it indicates total borrowing requirement of the government. So remember this particular fact here. What is primary deficit? Just exclude or just minus interest payments from fiscal deficit. You will get primary deficit. You have to remember just these formulas. Okay, so believe me, it is as easy as it gets. If you complicate these things, these things will always become complicated going forward. So what exactly is this primary deficit? Fiscal deficit excluding interest payments on previous loans. Government's current borrowings needs without the burden of past debt. So essentially, what are the current borrowing needs of the government? Fiscal deficit, total borrowing needs. Primary deficit particularly indicates current borrowing needs excluding the burden of the past debt. So to certain extent, just minus the interest payment from the fiscal deficit. What about revenue deficit? Obviously, revenue expenditure minus revenue receipt. Whenever there is a deficit, obviously you have to divide. You have to. So whenever there is, so revenue deficit is essentially when there is revenue expenditure minus revenue receipts is essentially called a revenue deficit. So as I said, this is simple as it gets formula here. So remember these three formulas. On these three formulas, you can actually solve the simplest of MCQs that were actually asked in recent prelims. So as I earlier said, there is FRBM Act of 2003 that set the fiscal deficit targets. So what are the key targets? Fiscal deficit limited to 3% of GDP. In it, general government debt capped at 60% of GDP by 24-25. Central government 40%, 20% for state government. So there is general government debt limit as well. It is capped at 60%. 60%. In it, you have central government at 40%, state government at 20%. But fiscal deficit, what is the fiscal deficit target? Generally 3% of GDP. Okay. So these are some targets in FRBM Act. It has been actually amended 4 times. This particular fact is also very important from the perspective of prelims. For 2004, 2012, 2015 and 2018, we have the amendments in FRBM Act. So as I said, mostly to change the fiscal year deficit targets, government has to amend that act. So this is the practice question for you. As I said, this is the PYQ that was there recently in the prelims paper of 2025. So if you know the formula well, you will be able to address this particular issue. So just comment your answer in the comment section. Very important and very interesting questions. This here, is really interesting. One of the simplest question. Okay. So you are asked here to what is the gross primary deficit. So as I said, you must be knowing primary deficit, fiscal deficit minus interest payments. It is as simple formula as it gets. So just minus the terms and you will minus the numbers and you will get the answer here. So just comment your answer in the comment section. Very interesting and very good questions. So the next important article that we are going to discuss is about enrollment in government schools getting declined. So essentially, what exactly is the relevance of this particular article? It is relevant from the perspective of education. You can cite such examples, such case studies, such data in your education related questions, particularly in GS2. So center is currently asking the states to raise enrollment in government schools. So what is observed? There is a decline in the enrollment in government schools. So essentially, it is a disturbing trend. Students are increasingly moving from government to private schools. So we have seen the fad of English medium schools. So essentially, it is a very disturbing trend. On the other hand, government is investing so much in our government schools, but there is a declining enrollment in government schools in some states, and that is actually a worrying sign despite a larger number of government institutions. So government institutions are obviously large in number, but despite that the enrollment is low. Education Ministry concerns raised in a meeting with states under the Samagra Shiksha scheme and PM Poshan. Both these schemes are very important from the perspective of increasing our school enrollment ratio. Samagra Shiksha as well as PM Poshan. So we have covered both these schemes in our earlier daily news analysis episodes. So these are the examples cited here. So for example, Andhra Pradesh. In Andhra Pradesh, you have 73% government schools. Government enrollment is at 46.33%, while private is at 52.09%. So can you imagine, despite having 73% of government schools in Andhra Pradesh, the actual enrollment in private schools is more. So this is really, really perplexing data. So similar data is there for, more than 5 to 6 states, which was discussed in that particular article, in this particular article. So essentially, for example, Telangana, there are 70% government schools, unaided private schools are 28.26%. But what about enrollment? Almost unaided schools, you have more people, 60.75% in Telangana also. So you can see the disparity. Despite forming 70% of schools, government institutions enroll only 38% of students, while private schools with fewer numbers account for 60% enrollment. This is the case with Telangana. So you can see the disparity here and why the government is worried. So government observations and recommendations, concern is the significant public spending not translating into higher enrollment in government schools. That's what, that is the primary concern. Essentially, government is investing so much in the government schools, but the enrollment is declining. So it is sort of a paradoxical thing that we are observing here. So what are the recommendations? Conduct root cause analysis, take remedial steps, build brand image and resource utilization. We know the problems of our government schools. Many times, these government schools are low in teacher training, quality of education. Lot of the times, the enrollment suffer due to the infrastructure issues as well. But the things are changing when it comes to our government schools, but that is not getting reflected in the enrollment ratios. That's the major concern now. So possible reasons, as I said many times, from teacher training to infrastructure issues are there. Aspirational shift is also one of the reasons. Aspirational shift towards private education. See, many times private education is something, is actually seen as a barometer of quality. So that's why, it is an aspirational things to get admission into private education institutions. Perceived quality gap, there is a quality gap, perceived quality gap, I will say. Post-COVID migration to private schools, Aadhaar-based data cleansing, reflecting actual numbers. Now, Aadhaar-based data, Aadhaar-based data, accurate data that we are getting. So that's why it is getting, the accurate numbers are getting reflected maybe. So that can be another reason as well. So, but despite this decline, what are some government schemes? So, from SSA, that is Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan, which was launched in 2001, and subsequent we have seen the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan particularly, which was launched in 2001, and subsequent years we have, in recent years we have seen Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan as well. RTA Act is there of 2009. So, essentially Article 21A implementation is there, and so essentially right to education for age group 16 to 14 becomes fundamental right under Article 21A. So, despite all these provisions, we have seen the decline, and in recent years we have seen NEP as well. So, under NEP we have changed so many things. We have this new formula of 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4 rather than earlier 10 plus 2. Now we have foundational literacy, vocational training from class 6, mother tongue instructions till class 5. So, under NEP 2020, despite all this, we have seen the decline in the enrollment. So, it is really worrying sign. So, we have seen these schemes as well, schemes for the government, by the government for the girls' education. There are supportive schemes like Sukanya Samruddhi Yojana. There is RMSA as well, Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan. So, all these schemes are there. So, just go through these schemes, very important from the perspective of prelims here. So, this is the practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Very important. Particularly, this particular article is mainly the data point you can utilize in your mains answers, particularly in GS2. The next important article that we are going to discuss is about IndiaAI Mission. See, many times AI related developments are often asked in prelims particularly. So, currently the news is IndiaAI, 3 more startups to build indigenous foundation models. So, many times these models are getting built by many countries. Many countries are heavily investing in AI, developing AI models. So, essentially so that they can train these models in the localized situation. So, essentially for fulfilling this particular our AI dreams, we have this IndiaAI Mission. So, essentially it is very important news from the perspective of GS3, particularly science and technology. Okay. So, about the news now, India has selected 3 additional startups for developing indigenous AI foundation models. So, as I said, we are actually investing heavily now under the IndiaAI Mission to develop these models. So what are these models? Socket AI. So to what exactly is this model does? It develops an open source model optimized for India's linguistic diversity, focused on sectors like defense, healthcare and education. Gyan AI. So Jan AI, Gyan AI. So for building a multilingual foundation model. So this will focus on multilingual foundation. Gyani AI to create a voice-based AI foundation model. So currently we have started these three foundations. India has also announced the addition of 16,000 more GPUs. What are the GPUs? Essentially processing units, okay, increasing the total available to 34,000 GPUs for startups, researchers in collaboration with industry partners. So we have increased the capacity of our GPUs as well. So what exactly is this IndiaAI mission? It aims to build robust ecosystem for AI innovation in India through strong public-private collaborations. So it will support the responsible and inclusive growth of AI ecosystem by enhancing data quality, enabling democratized access and fostering the development of indigenous AI capabilities. So that's what the current news focuses on, developing indigenous AI capabilities. So that's why we have formed these three foundational models. So this IndiaAI mission is implemented by Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. Very important from the perspective of prelims. Just remember the ministry here. Funding, it is to be provided over 5 years via PPP model. So funding is based on a PPP. Implementing agency is IndiaAI Independent Business Division under Digital India Corporation. So there is a separate implementing agency for IndiaAI. So what are some other India's AI initiatives? So there is IndiaAI initiatives, as we have discussed. Digital India Bhashini portal is there. We have Sarvam, One AI model, we have Chitralekha, we have Bharat Jain. So just go through these initiatives briefly, very important from the perspective of prelims. Particularly when it comes to AI, another important issue, rather concern is the global regulations. What about the data being misused by these AI companies, particularly MNCs? So there is data harvesting most of the time without the consent. So essentially the regulation of AI is emerging as a new front. So what are some global regulations regarding that? Because India doesn't have AI specific law yet. So under the IT Act only we are considering the AI related regulations currently. So that's why India needs its own AI related law. So there is a global AI advisory body which was launched by UN. There is EU AI Act. EU is oftentimes leader in this particular arena as well. We have G7 Hiroshima AI process, very important from the perspective of prelims. Just remember Hiroshima AI process. Then we have OECD's AI principles, we have global partnership for AI, and very important Bletchley declaration. See, many times you will get this sort of questions, particularly in prelims. So just remember Bletchley declaration is for AI regulations. So Bletchley declaration is signed by 28 countries and the EU. It declares, it is a declaration to cooperate on the frontier of AI safety and research particularly. So Bletchley declaration is related to EU and those 28 countries. Mostly it is regulations, safety and other research related regulations. So this is the practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. So the next important article that we are going to discuss is very interesting and very perplexing as well. Why are men taller than women? So you must have seen many times, men are oftentimes taller than women. It is not all the time true. Okay, many times these things are dictated by our gene pool, but mostly over the period we can observe that men are taller than women. So this particular article here is important from the perspective of science and technology and GS3. So essentially, what the new study published suggests is the average 5-inch height difference between men and women is due to gene called SHOX, shocks. So this is the gene responsible for this particular height difference. So what exactly is the role of this SHOX gene in height difference? But before it, this SHOX gene is a essentially what is the long form of this SHOX? Short stature homeobox gene. It is essential for skeletal development and is associated with short stature. So essentially SHOX is associated with short stature. So we have actually extracted this gene and it is observed that it is mostly related to the short stature related gene in our chromosomal, in our DNA. So the both males and females have 2 copies of SHOX gene. Currently, both male and female have 2 copies of SHOX gene, and the placement of the SHOX gene is near the end of sex chromosomes. So this fact here is very important. So particularly, women have sex chromosomes XX while men have XY. So you can see here, so this SHOX gene is at the near end of these sex chromosomes. In females, most genes on one of the 2X are silenced or inactive, but one region where the genes remain active is at the very tip of the X. The SHOX gene is close enough to the tip that is not quite silenced. So in men, the X with its SHOX is fully active, so is the Y. So essentially, this silencing of this particular SHOX gene is more prevalent in men. This means that a woman with her 2X chromosomes will have a slightly lower dose of the SHOX gene than a man. So particularly due to this particular fact here, slightly lower dose is there of this particular gene in women. Because why? Because mostly this SHOX gene is found at the tip of the sex chromosomes. In X particularly, it is bit suppressed, and due to women's composition of 2X sex chromosomes, it is further suppressed. So SHOX gene on the other hand is more prevalent on Y chromosome, on the lateral ends of Y chromosomes. So that's why so this prevalence of SHOX gene, the lower dose in women leads to this particular height difference, because essentially SHOX is associated with a stature. So that's why there is a genetic reason behind, on average, men being taller than women. Okay, so this is human karyotype. It is essentially the whole gene structure. So essentially you can see there is XY for male, XX for female. So essentially XX, whenever there is, these are sex chromosomes, so it essentially determines the sex particularly. So you can see there are 23 pairs, 23 here, 23 here. Okay, 23. Out of these 23, we have one sex chromosomes pair. Okay, so that is, in male we have this XY, while in female we have XX. Okay, so associated with this particular issue is knowing about some major sex chromosomal disorders. So this particular chart here is very, very important from the perspective of prelims. Particularly we have Turner syndrome, Klinefelter syndrome, XXX syndrome, XYY syndrome, and androgen insensitivity syndrome. See, mostly you must know what is the meaning of Turner syndrome, and mostly what do you mean by Klinefelter, and what is the difference between the two. Okay, so just go through this particular chart here briefly, very important from the perspective of prelims. I am not going to discuss this particular chart here. What are some other genetic diseases which are not sex chromosome linked? We have thalassemia, we have sickle cell anemia, we have Down syndrome. All these are genetic diseases, and many times diabetic is also emerging as a major genetic disease as well. So most of the times these genetic diseases is due to mutations, or in terms of sex chromosome related disorders, it is about the extra sex chromosome on X, or on X, in XX or in XY, that is in women as well as in men. So but on the other hand, more genetic diseases happen due to the mutations in certain gene pool. Okay, so these are very important. Just go through it from the perspective of prelims. So this is the practice question for you. Just comment your answer in the comment section. Very important. So, and this is very interesting as well. So, this is a sort of general observation that we do in populations, but again, we can find the clue in our genetic pool itself. So, in the decoded section, we are going to discuss one very important editorial that was featured in the Indian Express editorial page. It is called the Rankings Mirage. So, this particular article here analyzes India's recent jump from 5th to 4th largest economy, surpassing even Japan. Although that particular data, will be more accurate by the end of 2025. So, essentially, now what has happened is, Niti Aayog has jumped the ship, or jumped the gun rather, and declared India as a 4th largest economy on a nominal GDP front. But that will happen by the end of 2025. So, eventually it will happen by the end of 2025, we will surpass Japan. So, but again, the author here argues that we have to focus more now on inclusive growth, because when we compare ourselves with Japan on the technological front, we are catching up, but to certain extent that is not the same when it comes to per capita GDP levels as well. So, the standard of living, other factors, on other development indicators, we are way behind Japan. So, from that perspective, this particular ranking is a mirage. So, what exactly is this author arguing is, he is calling a new ranking of India a mirage. So, why he said so is, as I said, nominal GDP versus per capita GDP cap. So, while India's nominal GDP will surpass Japan by end of 2025, it is way far behind when it comes to per capita real GDP, per capita GDP in general. So, India's per capita GDP currently at $2280. So, it is somewhere around lower middle income country, remains far behind Japan's $33,900. So, we can see the huge gap in the per capita income. It makes the nominal GDP ranking less meaningful in reflecting actual living standards and economic growth. So, it does not indicate anything per se. India's growth story. So, way back in July 1991, the Finance Minister of India at that point of time, Manmohan Singh, told the parliament, or he predicted rather, forecasting the words of Victor Hugo's terms, that no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. So, essentially, India's time has come. So, India will eventually surpass Japan. So, there is no surprise in the rankings as such. So, it is the foregone conclusion, even that was predicted way back in 1991 by Manmohan Singh at that point of time. So, with the famous words of Victor Hugo that he said in the parliament, no power on earth can stop an idea whose time has come. So, idea of India as a economic juggernaut has come at that point of time, and no world power can stop that particular idea now. So, essentially there is no surprise. So, it is a mirage to a certain extent. So, 21st century as an Asian century. So, essentially, with the rise of China and subsequently India, it is no surprise that India will surpass Japan. Will surpass Japan, and also going forward in few years, India will also surpass Germany as well to become a 3rd largest economy. So, but before it, British historian Angus Maddison, what he observed in his survey of world economy is, China and India were on the way to recover their lost pace in the global economy. Okay, so essentially, in medieval Indian times and ancient times, India and China are both global economic juggernauts, but subsequent colonization and exploitation by the foreigners actually declined the economic prosperity which was there in India and China. But after the decolonization process in the with the dawn of 21st century, these two countries are making up with the lost time and lost space. So, they are reclaiming their rightful nature now. So, that is what is said by British historian Angus Maddison, that is 21st century is an Asian century, is the term given by Angus Maddison. So just, you can use these sort of terms in your essay writing. Okay, so or even in answers you can use the examples, these particular facts, so that it can enhance the quality of your answers. So essentially there is a debate of developing economy versus developed economy. So India is still a developing economy. There we have lots of needs, particularly this particular. On the other hand, Japan is a developed, highly industrialized and technologically advanced economy through age, though it is aging and slowing down. Although there is aging of the population and there is a slowdown in growth, Japan is still highly technologically evolved. Volatility in economic rankings. There is always volatility in economic rankings. As I earlier said, those provisional estimates are also bound to change in subsequent years. By 27, we will have the revised numbers for that particular data as well. So often there is a volatility in economic rankings. So per se, the ranking does not indicate anything. India's relative position versus China. Okay, now the Chinese GDP is around $18 trillion. So essentially, to catch up with China, we have to we are way behind China, or rather, we will take lot of time to reach the Chinese level. Okay, so essentially, currently Chinese economy is several times larger than India. Why is essentially then this chatter, particularly about the ranking of India, is important? Is position of Japan and Germany is precarious now. So both economies are facing a slowdown in growth due to various reasons. Japan in particular, after the Abenomics. So Abenomics, Japanese PM Abe, very Shinzo Abe, where one of the foremost, or one of the foremost economic giants which propelled Japanese growth. At the same time, in his time, by the end of his term, Japanese growth story tend to decline as well. So through his 3 arrows program, 3 arrows of what? Aggressive monetary easing, large liberal fiscal policy, and the structural reforms aimed at enhancing productivity and growth. So this is the 3 arrows program of Abenomics. Just remember this particular fact, very important from the perspective of mains as well as prelims. But subsequent growth declined due to external and internal and domestic factors, particularly aging population and other things. But Japan is not worried now due to India's rise. See, earlier what used to happen, when China surpassed Japan, there is huge hue and cry. Subsequently, through these Abenomics, Japanese PM Abe tried to actually propel Japanese growth so that it can be competitive with China. See, China and Japan are competing as a geopolitical rivals. That's why oftentimes Japan aligns itself more with US trajectory, so that it can have the upper edge when it comes to vis-a-vis China, because essentially the economic rivalry is won by China because of its huge economic role now. So essentially, but now Japan is not worried about India's rise. Why? Because India is emerging as Japan's strategic partner. We are geopolitical buddies now. So essentially, Japan is not worried like China, like Chinese rise. Okay. So essentially, what about Germany? Germany in recent years is also facing a slowdown. So essentially, India will surpass Germany in going forward as well. So, but when it comes to India's position will be fixed at third for long time, because there is a huge gap. As of now, China is at $18 trillion. Even if India goes surpassing Germany to say 5 trillion or even 6 trillion, that gap is still several times huge. So for a long time, India will be third largest. So essentially, we do not have to that much, so we have to focus on the holistic inclusive growth. So that's what the article argues. So why should India focus on inclusive growth instead of just GDP rankings? Oftentimes GDP rankings are pretty much, sort of superfluous, I will say, but still they play very important purpose, very important role. That's why when it comes to holistic economic growth, we have to focus on inclusive growth. You will find the questions on inclusive growth a lot, particularly in mains. So why we should focus on inclusive growth? These are the generic arguments. You must have already known these arguments. We have improving quality of life for all, reducing inequality, sustaining long-term development. For all this and achieving the sustainable development, we have to focus on economic growth. So in conclusion, with US and China in race for economic space and geopolitical influence, India's best bet would be to focus on its economic performance and ensure that it can sustain an inclusive growth process that makes economy more competitive and improve people's lives. So now the focus should be on inclusive growth. So that's what the article here argues. So this is the practice question for you. If you understood the article correctly, you will be able to address this particular question thoroughly. So that's it from my side, and stay tuned for another edition of Daily News Analysis on Monday. Thank you.